And since you said 1984, that is crazy. So she has seen the ups and downs of real estate, and what's happening today in real estate is completely different. So, Mary, can you tell me what's happening today, and then we'll see if we need to back it on to what's going on?
Oh my God. OMG. Where do you start? What you're looking at is, for me, and realize this is my opinion. It's not the opinion of CAR, NAR, any association. This is just simply my opinion.
Right, and everything we're talking about on any of the interviews that we do is just our opinion. We're not representing CAR and we're not representing NAR. It's what we've seen and what we've learned, and we've been to, and Mary's been to most of the meetings about what's going on. So that's why I pulled her over and I'm like, let's talk about what we can say. So where we are at right now.
Well, first off, let's start off with, here we go again with the media blitz of misinformation. The fact that
Oh yeah, the fake news, right?
Well, it's majorly misinformation. One of the things that they're touting is that the cost of homes is going to go down, and that's not accurate. And everybody knows Economics 101, it's all about supply and demand, and we have an inventory shortage here in the state of California and in other states as well. So obviously, that's what's pushing the prices up. You have multiple offers on properties, and the best offer is the one that's going to get it.
So are real estate agents already starting? So from what I understand, because as I've been doing real estate for a long time, if I need the seller to pay for closing costs, because a lot of times we have those first-time home buyers, how is this going to affect the first-time home buyer and the veterans?
Well, according to the settlement agreement that's still subject to court approval of $418
So it's not in
million
stone yet.
It's not in stone. The court may not approve it, and then again, the court might. The way we do real estate is going to change. In past years, the seller was paying the buyer's agent. Well, that's not going to be the case anymore. The seller will not be paying the buyer's agent. This settlement agreement that they arrived at is going to change so that now the buyer is going to be responsible for paying his agent. Now, the sad thing about that, there's going to be a lot of chaos and a lot of havoc, and the person and the group that's going to be impacted the most by this change is going to be the consumer, your first-time home buyers, because they don't have a complete understanding of the buying process, and this is just going to add to it.
Do you feel that that's how this came about in the first place, when new agents or people that weren't as educated as they should have been, they took their 3 classes, they took their tests, and then they're telling all their family and friends, hey, you don't have to pay me anything, you work with me, and that's not true. So tell me, when they said I'm working for free, what did that really mean, and how should they have said that to make sure that their clients knew that they were getting paid, but they're getting paid from the seller?
Well, you always have to, disclosure.
Nobody works for free.
You have to offer full disclosure. So maybe it wasn't coming out of their personal pocket, but there's 2 foods of thought here. On one hand, they're going to say it's coming out, the seller is paying everything out of their profit, but then it's the buyer who's paying for the property, who's providing that profit to be made to the seller. So think about that one for a little bit. Give me the question again.
So the whole misconception is that the real estate agent's working for free, because we've never said we're working for free. And I think when somebody says, oh, you're my best friend, I don't want you to work for free, because a lot of agents lose their buyers because of that.
Well, part of okay, let's back it up a little bit more. Part of the premise of the lawsuit had to do with antitrust, because the claim was that we were price fixing, and that we were, and everybody knows, if you've been doing real estate for some time, that item is negotiable.
Right.
It's negotiable.
It's always been negotiable.
It's not set in stone. You don't walk into a seller and take a listing and say, this is what you're paying me. You sit down and you let the seller know the services that you're going to provide, and what you feel you're worth, and then the seller comes back and says, okay, I'll pay it, or okay, how about paying this much or
Right.
that much? And it's a negotiation process that everybody arrives to an agreed amount or agreed percentage, however it is. It's never been fixed. So that's the first misnomer, but it is what it is.
Right. So, are we allowed to talk about? I'm asking her, and I'm slightly being distracted because I was trying to think about what the hell is that noise going on outside, because there is construction going on at my house, but it's the trash guy picking up the trash. Of course, he had to come while we planned on being live. But anyway, the big thing that I wanted to ask you, because I don't think everybody knows, I don't know how public knowledge this is. And we know, we go to all the meetings, so we know what's going on. And are we allowed to talk about how the jury was, how 8 of them,
Well,
because out of 8 jury people, only
was-
2 of them were homeowners. No, 4 of them were homeowners, but 2 of them used realtors. The other 6 did not ever understand what real estate with a real estate agent is.
you
Correct?
had a jury made up of 8 people, and
Correct.
yes, you're correct. And of the 8 people, 4 were not homeowners, 2 sold property for sale by owner, they were FSBOs, and 2 used real estate agents. And that was it. It took them roughly about an hour or less to arrive at a verdict, and then they
Of $1.8 billion. Less
well,
than
no,
2
they
hours.
didn't
Oh.
arrive at
they didn't arrive at that.
They arrived at a verdict where they said they viewed in favor of the plaintiff, and we were the defendants. And then they asked for information, and based on that information that they received, they arrived at the dollar figure of 1.8 billion dollars. And because it's an antitrust lawsuit, that gets trebled,
Which is multiplied by 3.
3. So, which was a lot of money. And the thing is, you know, attorneys love people that fight for their principles. It's the principle of the thing, because that makes them a great deal of money.
It makes the attorney's money, not the plaintiff's.
See, my issue is in history in real estate, the buyers did not always have representation. The buyers would make an offer on a house, but they didn't have proper representation. We used to say caveat emptor to the buyers, buyer beware. That was a question that was on the real estate exam.
Yeah, buyer
Well,
beware.
So ever since then, we worked really hard to provide representation to the buyer.
Correct.
So that the buyer now has representation. Well, what this lawsuit has done is, because you might find some buyers thinking that it's going to be cheaper for them and less expensive if they go directly to the seller, which I'm sure you've seen these commercials that are on TV that shall remain nameless, where they're constantly stating, we've done the work for you. Well,
They haven't.
I beg to differ. There's more to purchasing a home than just finding out where the schools are located, the shopping centers are located, and the stores are located, and whether it's a good neighborhood or not. And the people that are in real estate, you understand that. I mean, there's property inspections, there's financing that has to be done.
There's appraisals.
There's insurance.
There's termite
appraisals.
reports.
There's a great deal more, and a first-time home buyer, especially, even an experienced buyer, they have to navigate through this process, and that's what we help
Do you
them
remember
do.
the number of things that a buyer's agent does for a buyer? That there's a big long list of all
It's
the things you have to do.
174, and then they came up with an additional 105, so that comes up to
279?
yeah.
279 things that a buyer's agent should be doing for them, besides the fact that it's our fiduciary duty to make sure that they're protected and everything's done correctly, because a lot of times things pop up at the last minute and you have to run around and try to figure out how your buyer is still going to be able to buy that property. And you know, with a buyer not having representation, I mean, what about dual agency? Like they're kind of pushing the buyer to have dual agency again, right?
Well, it may be a possible result of this, because if they go directly to the seller's agent, now the seller is going to be representing the buyer and the seller. And, you know, not to say that
Isn't
the
that
seller's
like,
agent
wait,
is
isn't that
not
like
capable.
me hiring a divorce attorney and asking my husband to use the same divorce attorney?
Well, sometimes that'll work if you guys are real friendly and you don't care
Right,
about the outcome.
right,
Okay, but most of the time it won't work. So
right.
I understand what you're. It's something that we have to be careful with, and dual agency a lot of times can get agents into trouble. You know, you got to remember California is the most litigious state out there.
Well, I know something that we can really talk about that is out there and people are freaking out about is the new buyer's representation broker contract. And I know that we were on a meeting a couple days ago where they were talking about the open house situation. What happens? Okay, we'll do both ways. So, first, when I walk in the open house and you ask me, every single time somebody walks in an open house, the agent has to say,
Are you working with an agent?
that's the very first thing. So if you're a buyer and you're working with an agent and this wonderful agent's holding an open house and you walk in, the first thing out of the agent's mouth better be, if they're ethical, and if they're not ethical, why do you want to work with them? If they're ethical, it should be exactly what she said. Are you working with an agent? If I say yes, what happens?
If you say yes, I'm not supposed to talk to you.
Right. Now, what if I say no? I'm not working with an agent, but I still want to see the house.
There's still discussion going on. The forms, the buyer broker agreement that is a draft right now is already changing again. And there's anticipation that it may change again after that. So we can give you all kinds of information, but it's not going to be set in stone. The only thing that you should take away from our conversation today, as far as the buyer broker agreement is concerned, is that effective in July moving forward, before you show property to a buyer, that buyer broker agreement has to be signed.
By law. By
Okay.
law. You have to sign it if you're a buyer.
But it's part of the settlement agreement and it will be mandatory. And so you have a responsibility to find out. You know, there's all kinds of foods of thought. That buyer broker agreement, sometimes some people say, don't make it for too long because you want to find out if you're a good
Right,
mix,
right.
that you're comfortable with your agent or you're comfortable with your buyer, because it goes both ways. You have to be able to treat your agent like a priest in confession, is my expression. That you got to tell them everything, all the issues that you have with credit, everything, so that they know up front, so it can be addressed, so it doesn't blow up at the end of the transaction and mess everything
Well,
up.
I know that one of the fears that came about many years ago, I want to say it was at least 5 years ago, maybe 5 to 7 years ago, it could have been even longer, when people were first talking about buyer broker agreements. A lot of people, I remember one time when somebody walked into one of my open houses and I was talking to him, and he basically didn't want to, he wanted to go into open houses and see the homes, but he didn't want to talk to the real estate agent. So he would say, like what he said to me, oh, I have a buyer broker agreement with somebody I'm working with. And I'm like, well, how long is it for? And he's like, it's for 10 years. And I'm like, I knew it was fake. But the whole point is you don't want to make it too long because you may not like working with that person. That's the whole point, right? And I think a lot of people are scared because they're thinking, okay, if I sign this buyer broker agreement, how long am I stuck with this agent and what can I do and can I not do? And I mean, you were in the class with the buyer broker agreement, and that's where they said, do you have anything you want to share from that class?
Well, you can, as a buyer, and an agent that for that matter, but as a buyer, you can cancel that agreement.
Right.
But there's a process to do it, to make sure that it's done right, because the last thing you want is to do something halfway and then it turns around and bites you later. But you can, if you're not comfortable with who you're working with for whatever reason, you can cancel it. However, if that agent was responsible for procuring the property that you're making an offer on, it's a different story. So be careful. Don't think that you can use an agent, sign the agreement, have them show you all these properties, spend $1 bazillion on gas and time and effort, and then you find a house that you like as a buyer, and then you're looking at the agent, you know what, I want to cancel now. And then you go directly to the seller to try to buy the house. Guess what? You still owe payment to the agent that found that house for
Right,
you.
because agents don't work for free. I mean, you have to think about it this way. How would you like it if you went to work every day for a year and a half and then they said, oh, by the way, we're not going to pay you?
Pretty much.
Yeah, so I mean, real estate agents do the right thing to make sure that you find the right property. And, most of the time, a lot of the really good agents aren't going to waste a lot of time for your time there, because what we do is we interview our clients, we make sure we know what they want. Mary has lending backgrounds. Mary, have you heard anything new about the lending side of this whole debacle?
There, from what I understand, because you're limited, if you're financing the property with 5 to 10% down, the maximum concession, that means the seller can contribute towards your closing costs, is 3%. If you're below 90%, the maximum the seller can contribute is 6%. And they don't allow it to exceed that because it has an impact on the property value. And you've got to remember, the simplest way to describe lending is that it's all about risk. And so the objective is to minimize that risk and exposure to the lender as much as possible. So if you're buying a property with 10% or less down, that's why you have mortgage insurance, because that mortgage insurance helps to minimize and reduce the risk to the lender. So you keep that in mind. So now you have some people thinking that they can look to the buyer to pay their fee, but in addition to that, they're going to look to the seller to help the buyer. Well, the lenders are working on this because they understand, and this is where I'm saying it's going to be chaotic and it's going to be crazy, and the ones that are going to feel the impact the most is going to be the consumer.
And it's going to be the lower income consumer.
Absolutely.
So what we're basically doing with all these changes is, unless we figure out how to make this work, first time home buyers,
Veterans.
VA buyers, and those are our veterans who have fought for us. FHA buyers are going to have a whole lot more and a harder time buying. But what I'm wondering is, has anybody, I know they probably have, and if anybody knows, it's going to be Mary, has anybody talked to the people who are doing the down payment assistance programs?
All of NAR, CAR, they're all in conversations
With everybody.
with everybody right now. We're not privy to those behind the scenes conversations, but they're talking to the GSEs. That's your
Wait, they're not going to know what GSEs are.
That's Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, Ginnie Mae. Ginnie Mae has to do with I can't forget, it just left me right now. But anyway, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac.
Ginnie Mae does guaranteeing.
Yes, it's your VA loans.
Your
Sorry.
VA loans.
It just left me.
Yeah.
Anyway, they're talking to them. They're talking to HUD. HUD is with FHA. You have CalHFA. All those, they're very restrictive.
And
as
CalHFA,
far-
by the way, so you know, because whenever we talk and we go on and we're saying
It's
CalHFA,
FHA.
FHA, GSEs, we're talking all these crazy words, and people who are watching us right now who are interested at all in real estate are going, what are they talking about? So GSEs are the people on the back end who are the backside of the mortgage, right? Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac.
GSEs, okay. I'm going to give you a real quick history. Prior to the Depression, which was 1930, whatever, loans were made for 5 years at a time. The farmers would go to the banks, they'd get a 5-year
And it was
loan.
interest only.
And then at the end of the 5 years, they would either have the loan paid off, or they would go to the bank to get the loan extended or refinance it. When the Depression hit, the banks had no money. And that's why a lot of those properties went into foreclosure and people lost their homes. Well, Franklin Delano Roosevelt and his administration said, we want you to make those loans for 30 years. And the bank said, you're nuts, you're crazy.
You're crazy.
Not only do we want you to make it for 30 years, we want you to make it with 3.5% down. And again, the bank said, you're crazy. And they said, we will insure.
So the government insured the loans.
The government insured the loans. And then they did the same thing with VA, where they guaranteed. That was a little bit later. However, the banks would hold these loans. Well, now they say we can't hold these loans for 30 years. So they created the government sponsored enterprises. That's your GSEs. That was Fannie and Freddie. And what Fannie and Freddie do is they buy those loans after those lenders, the banks, the mortgage bankers, they make those loans, they turn around and sell them, and so they get the money back so that they can continue to making more loans. but there's certain restrictions and parameters that they have to adhere to be able to do
And
that.
they're making the rules about how much we can, because
Right.
from what I understand is, so when I was thinking about it, I'm like, well, that doesn't really matter right now, because I'm thinking, okay, if the house is $399 and it'll appraise for $415 to $425, how come I can't just go in and say, okay, we'll give you, Mr. Seller, this is what I was thinking, we'll give you, Mr. Seller, $415, and Mr. Seller, give me my $15,000 commission, and you'll still get your $399. But there's a problem to that, and Mary's, I could see her thinking about it, because it has something to do with, okay, now the banks are not doing just a mortgage loan, right?
Right.
They're financing the commission, and how does that work?
Well, that's part of the problem.
That's part of the
Okay,
problem.
is because the value isn't necessarily based on the appraised value for the lender. The value has been established by buyer and seller when the buyer says to the seller, Mr. Seller, I will pay you this much for your house, and Mr. Seller says, okay, I accept it. Value is now established. What the appraiser does, the appraiser comes in to substantiate that value, and most of the time they do, but every once in a while
The
they
appraisal
don't.
comes in low.
And that's why the lender will lend on the purchase price or the appraised value, whichever is less. So once they've established the value, and the lender is going to lend 90% of that value, well, if you start paying things, now you're reducing the value by that much. So they're not really at 90% loan
They're
to
at like
value.
100%.
Correct. They're at 105%. And that's where the problem
And the risk
comes
is
in.
higher.
Correct. So they're working on this problem because they recognize it, but it's having a major impact on affordability. And we already
Well,
have
what they're
an
not
issue.
understanding is they think they're fixing something when they're really making it's like taking a glass and throwing it at the wall, and now it's shattered in a million pieces, and you're trying to figure out, okay, now that you're saying that the buyer has to pay for their own commission, for their own real estate agent,
Fee.
their own fee. A lot of people are now calling it a fee. The buyer has to pay their buyer's agent a fee. Where are they going to get that money from? And if they're a first-time home buyer, that's going to be hard, because they're not going to have that money. If maybe down payment assistance programs will pay that fee, but I really doubt it, because they want to pay the down payment and the closing costs. So somebody's going to have to come up with the money to pay the fee for the agent, because if you have the wrong agent, let me give you an example, and I know Mary will share some of her examples.
And we all
Now,
have our stories.
what you have to understand is, in every business, because this is hard for me to say, because in every business there are bad players. And we don't want to say that there's realtors that are bad players, but every business has those people that
They
do
have bad
something wrong.
attorneys, bad
There's
lawyers.
bad attorneys, there's bad teachers, there's bad
Bad
everything.
lawyers.
And the seller I'm working with right now, bought her home and paid cash. She put down cash. She found her own house, but she didn't know how. So just like now, okay, so this is a good example about how are the buyers going to represent themselves. She didn't know how to approach the seller or the seller's agent. So she hired an agent to put an offer in on a home she had already found. Because there are people that don't know how to communicate and don't know how to write an offer or what to do. So she took her friend or whoever it was that put in the offer. She had already found the home. And when she got the home, I don't know if I want to say the bad player was the Wells Fargo, I want to say REO agent, or if it was her agent that didn't speak up. But the REO agent, what they did is, when you buy a home, you guys, just so that you know this, when you buy a home, I should get the home the way it was. When I get the keys in my hand and I open the door, it should look like it did on my final walkthrough. And what happened to my seller right now, she bought the house 5 years ago. She opened the door and there was a transient living in there. Not only was there somebody living in there, but what he did was he was cold. So he took the cabinets, he broke them off of the kitchen cabinets, and he broke them off of some of the bathroom cabinets. So not all the cabinets are gone, and he used them for firewood. So when the house was handed to her by the Wells Fargo REO agent, an REO agent is a real estate owned home, so the bank took it back. She didn't get the house how it was. So her buyer's agent, this is the importance of a buyer's agent, should have went back to that other agent and said, look, my client opened the door and this was what was in there, so you need to fix this. and it should have been fixed. Now we're trying to sell a home that's missing cabinets. So, and what do you do at that situation? If you don't have a buyer's agent fighting for you, you may get the same situation. Mary, tell us a story because they love stories.
Well, try new construction. What that means is somebody's buying a house from a development.
And everybody thinks they have to go
okay.
straight to the
So-
developer.
So, and I don't want to mention
Who the
names
developer
or
is.
who the developer is. So it's a brand new project, and we showed it. I showed it, and then we wrote up an offer. And then the agent that represented the developer came to me and said, "Okay, Mary, you're done. You're gonna get paid your fee, and you can just go, and we'll take it from here. We'll do the rest." And I
In
looked
other words,
at her,
go away, agent.
and I looked at her and I said, "But I don't work that way." And my buyer's looking at me like, "Don't leave me," because he was a first-time home buyer. So he instructed the agent from the project to CC me on everything. The purchase contract alone was 173 pages long. So I don't want to hear everybody complain about our 17-page purchase
Yeah, our
agreement.
17 pages.
Okay.
Not,
But it was 173 pages long, and it was all in favor of the builder. And there was nobody from that development sitting down with him to help him go over it. It was just, here you go, sign it and return it.
I remember when
So-
I bought my house from the
Okay.
developer. It's like sign here, sign here, sign here, sign here. They don't give you any time to read it.
So we're going through everything, and I'm constantly saying, I'm not an attorney, I'm not an attorney. However, we proceeded. The other issue was it was new construction, and they were trying to dissuade him from doing a property inspection. Well, folks,
You can do a property inspection on new construction.
you should do a property inspection on new construction, because this way you're going to find out if there's any kinks. There were a lot of issues. There was a cracked shower door that needed to be fixed and replaced.
That's huge.
There was wiring, because they took off the electrical panel and the wiring behind it was all screwed up. So, I mean, there are issues that the property inspector can find to help the homeowner, so that there's not issues afterwards. So there's a lot of things that agents who represent buyers, you should be really proud of the job that you do. It only takes a few to reflect poorly on the rest of us, but we work really hard to get our buyers and sellers into a good transaction where they're getting the highest and best for their money and for their sale. And sometimes we even go beyond, cleaning up somebody's yard, cleaning somebody's kitchen, doing painting, helping them with taxes. There's a lot of things that we do in addition to just representing you on the transaction. But that's a whole nother story. I digress. I'm sorry.
Right. I know. Back to what the hell is happening right now. I mean, what am I supposed to do if I'm a buyer? Like right now, when does this take effect? I mean, if I was a buyer, between you and me, if I was a buyer, I'd be buying yesterday, because now's the time that you're not going to have to worry about how you're going to come up with the money, right?
Absolutely. It's supposed to take effect in July, but again, everybody has to remember
It has to be
it's
approved.
subject to court approval. We still don't know what that outcome's going to be. So that's the first thing. And as knowledge is power.
Knowledge is
That's
power.
all I can say is that sit down, find yourself an agent. If you're a buyer, find yourself an agent that you can sit down with, have a conversation, and see if they can guide you. That agent is working with a lender. The lender will get there and they're going to pre-qualify you, tell you what you can and can't do. I know some people are waiting for rates to come down. That's a big, huge mistake.
Well, they're not coming
Waiting for
down.
rates to come down. They may come down by the end of the year, but guess what's going to happen? The cost of the house is just going to go up.
The cost of the house is going to go up. You're waiting to buy a home. I don't know what you got. I don't know what buyers are waiting for. I
Right.
mean, if it's the interest rates, I bought my first property when rates were at 18%. So I don't know what's wrong with 6%. And 6% is historically low for the last, 30 years?
We're still in single digits.
Right.
And the thing is that life is all about options. So as
I like that. Life is about options.
it's about options. Get yourself into a property. There are programs that can get you into affordable payments without negative amortization. What negative amortization is you're making a payment this small
Can't read
and the
it.
interest is like this. So I'm just saying, get yourself into a property, get yourself a program that can help you with affordable payments, and then down the road when you're hopefully making more money or the rates do come down, you're in a position to be able to refinance, sell, buy something else. However, if you don't do anything and you just wait,
Right.
then you're going to wait yourself out of owning a home.
And I gotta say, it's like, do it now or don't do it at all. I didn't even think about it when I bought my first home. My first thought was, I'm gonna move out of my parents' home and I'm never gonna rent, because rent is like throwing your money down the toilet. And my very first property I bought for a whopping $58,000. And when it gained equity, I took money out of it and bought another property. And that's called pyramiding, but I didn't even know that that's what that was. And right now, with everybody waiting, it says, "Wait, I'm trying to find out." Whenever a question pops up, I'm trying to see if it's a question that we have to answer right away regarding what we're talking about. But so you're saying, and I don't think that everybody really understands this. We have an agreement between the plaintiff and the defendant, but it's not approved by the judge.
By the court, yes.
And once the judge approves it, how fast can CAR and the National Association of Realtors change all the forms and train the people? I mean, I know we're trying to do it now.
They're working on it. They're working on it now. And I mean, they're changing the draft according to the things that they're learning and such. But we're anticipating that we're going to have those forms available by July.
Right.
But they want to make sure that everybody's informed. You start learning and anticipating, because we do have a buyer broker agreement right now that you can use. And I think what's going to happen when it changes, that you're going to have a matrix, a grid, so that it's supposed to be easier for you to be able to explain it to your buyer, read it, and to fill it out.
Right. But the buyers are still going to be sitting there going, "Well, I'm responsible for your commission. Here goes a good one, Mary. I'm responsible for your commission. What happens if I find the house I love and they won't pay you? How am I going to get my home?"
Well, that's when a good agent is talking to the listing agent, the seller's agent, and they start talking and they start negotiating. And all of that remains to be seen. We can't really look into the future, but I don't think a good agent is going to stand in the way of a buyer
Absolutely not.
getting the home that they want.
Right.
And something can be worked out, something will be worked out, and we just have to wait and see.
Well, and every deal, I know that every deal we do is different.
Absolutely.
And I know one time I was offering as a listing agent, I was offering a really low commission for somebody to bring me a buyer. And an agent from another company said to me, he called me and he said, "Okay, so you're offering a really low commission." I'm like, "Yeah, the seller really doesn't want to pay a high commission." And he's like, "And your house is overpriced." I'm like, "Well, I beg to differ. It's not overpriced." But we talked about the price of the home. We talked about the commission. I said, "Let me talk to my seller." I talked to my seller, and my seller came up on the commission to the other side, and we put a deal together. So the moral of the story is, we all have to communicate. And the problem was, a lot of the buyer's agents didn't know how to communicate correctly, and they didn't have their skill of negotiating. I mean, we really have to know how to negotiate and talk to each other. And that's not just a real estate problem. It's a problem. People are not communicating, and that's why we're having problems in the world in general, don't you think?
Absolutely. And here's the other issue, is that, again, I go back to that advertising that you're seeing on TV quite a bit about how we did the work for you. Problem is that you can go directly to the seller as a buyer, but then you have no representation. You have nobody to tell you
what to do if something doesn't work.
Gee, are you aware, maybe you need to get that hazard disclosure, the one that tells you if you're in an earthquake zone
or a flood zone,
or if a flood zone. Is there somebody there to work with you to get insurance, your homeowner's insurance, which is not an easy feat today? Is there somebody that said, "You know what, you need to have a termite report"? Or, "Gee, you got your termite report and you have termites. maybe you can negotiate with the seller to help you pay for
Yeah,
that
who's going to
termite
pay to
work
get rid of the termites?
that you have on the property, or maybe you can get the seller to pay it. Gee, there's some plumbing issues, there's a roof issue, maybe we can negotiate something where you can get a credit to fix those repairs. And guess what? Or maybe your agent will tell you about an FHA 203K, which is a government insured loan
That will let you finance the fixing.
finance the fixings that need to be done. So there's value in having representation. We don't want to go back to the Cabot emptor. So this is just something that I'm throwing out there to your agents, to you agents, and to your buyers, that there's more to purchasing a home than just knowing where the schools are, where public transportation is, and the demographics of where the property is located.
Which brings me to, like, when you first started talking about that whole section right there, it was funny because you say that commercial says, oh, you found, we found you the home and you don't need an agent. We did all the work for you. And I remember I had a new agent that I was training because I do some coaching. And it was really funny because it wasn't funny. We were working really hard to get the property in escrow. And it was hard because it was vacant land and they were looking to build a truck stop on it. And we'd find the piece of vacant land, but then we wouldn't get the city to approve what he wanted to do. And we were going in circles for quite a while. And we finally found the perfect property and we opened escrow. And the new agent says to me, okay, I don't need you anymore. I got this. And I looked at him and I said, we've only just begun. Because this is where the can of worms start opening up and you find problems with the property, problems with the permits, problems with termites, anything that you could possibly find, we find in our inspections. And we're not trying to kill the deal. We're just trying to make sure that everybody's getting a fair deal and that if the seller knows something about the property, they have to disclose it to you and we have to work through it. So, Mary, do you have anything else you want to add about what's going on in the world of real estate today before we close them out? You guys, here's the thing, what we want you to do. If you were able to watch the whole thing or even just parts of it, go ahead and go in the comments and ask us questions. And Mary and I are going to be in the town hall tomorrow with CRMLS. That's a big, huge MLS. And then for Thursday, there's something else too, right? Not just the ambassadors meeting, but something else. We have meetings like 2 and 3 times a day, learning about what's happening in our industry. And that's the other thing I would say is make sure that your agent that you're talking to, if they're not following along what's going on and they don't know what's happening, I would say find another agent, right?
You want an agent that's involved. I mean, that's paramount, especially right now. An agent that's involved makes a big difference between an agent that's not. I mean, that's about as simple as I can put it. I get referrals, and a lot of times I get referrals from people that have been working with other people that kept telling them, no, you can't do it. They come to me, and next thing you know, we find them a property, we got them approved, and they're in a home.
Well, and the other thing is, I mean, like what you just said, I mean, we could talk about war stories all day about buyers who've had people that did not represent them. And another good example is I had a new agent that came to me and she's like, I have a friend that wants to talk to you and she's been looking for a home for 1.5 years. If you've been looking for a home for 1.5 years, there's obviously a problem. There's either something the buyer's hiding from the listing, from their agent, their buyer's agent, or they weren't pre-approved on their loan or something's up. Because I don't know about you, Mary, but I would say almost all my buyers usually buy between the first and the third time out. You don't go out 50 times with a person. Now, something that will change is when the economy is like it is now. If you're buying a home at a level where a lot of people are buying it, you're going to have bidding wars, and that's going to be a whole different story. But I mean, the girl that I was about to talk about was, so she had been looking for a home for over 1.5 years. And one of my students got their license and asked me to talk to her. So I picked up the phone. Well, actually, I do Zoom meetings with everybody. And we're on a Zoom meeting, and I said to her, I said, I understand you're looking for a home. And she said, yeah. And I said, well, what are you looking for? And she didn't know what I meant. She didn't know what I even meant when I said, what are you looking for? And I said, price range. And she goes, well, we're looking, are you ready for this one? They're looking in Azusa all the way up through the desert, the high desert. I'm like, so can you narrow it down to where you want to be? And she's like, well, the problem is we really don't know our price range. We're looking at homes between the price of 400,000 and 800,000. I'm like, why did you pick that price range? And she's like, well, because that's what we think we can afford. And I said, have you talked to a lender? And she said, no, we don't know what we qualify for. I said, you've been looking for a house for a year and a half and you don't even know what you qualify. What if you would have found a house that you love and you have to have for $900,000 and you only qualify for 300,000? Or what if you would have settled for something that was 400 and later you found you could have bought that $900,000 house? So why, I don't know what, Mary, do you have anything to say to these people? Because so both Mary and I have had, well, you still have your MLO license. I'm still current on mine. We both, we both have been in real estate since the 1980s. And so we've both seen it all. So I know we keep trying to cut off and saying, what do we have to say to you guys? But the thing that we want you to do is ask us the questions you want to know, because we have, God, together we have over 80 years of experience, 80. So, and we've been working in the trenches. So what do you want to say to everybody?
One of the first things everybody should be asking, if you're first thing, you've got to find out, you got to get your buyer pre-approved.
And if you're a buyer, see a lender. Mary is a great lender. Actually, Mary is one of my teams. So I have 3 loan teams that I refer to, and the first one they go to is Mary, and she usually can get them done.
You want to get them full credit approval. If you get your buyer full credit approval, you just turn them into a cash buyer. Okay, because now the only thing that you're waiting for is, if you find a property, is your preliminary title report. You submit the purchase agreement.
You can close pretty quick.
And your escrow instructions, and the loan gets submitted, so you can close relatively quickly. The other thing in today's market, when you're taking a listing, you want to make sure that you get the seller to be really frank with you. You want to ask them for a copy of their mortgage statement so that you can see how much they owe. Okay, you'd be surprised how many times agents just ask the seller, well, what do you owe? And they'll give them a figure, and they may be $50,000 off. And I don't know.
Or they may have an equity line of credit and they can't even sell their property.
And they're thinking that doesn't count. It's just a loan that they're going to take with them. So you need to ask them about the financing. And the other thing is, when that prelim comes in, that preliminary title report, you want to make sure that you sit down and you read that right away, because it's going to let you know if there's any types of liens on the property. Like I had one where there was a bail bonds on it, because the husband and wife had gotten arrested. Well, that deal just went up in smoke.
I had one that when we got into escrow, and I knew there might be a problem because it was a house that she hadn't been paying her payments on, but I had no idea that she had an IRS $220,000 lien. And people go, well, did that deal die? And I said, no, I called the IRS and I negotiated with them.
Yep.
And so real estate agents do way more than people even have a clue what we do, because at the end of the deal, or even in the middle of the deal, something may come up that you don't know how to deal with, and now your deal dies and you've already spent money on, let's see, how much money does a buyer spend on a house before it falls out of escrow? A home inspection could be what, $400?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Easily.
Okay, so home inspection,
credit report,
appraisal. So usually they're at like what, $1,000 to $1,200 before they still could fall out of escrow and have to start all over again. And you don't want to spend $1,200 every time you try to go to a home, and then you find out maybe there's a lien or something that the seller didn't know about.
If you hit a bump in the road, a blip is like, oops, there's a lien from the franchise tax board or from the IRS, or they're really far behind in payments and the property's in foreclosure. That's a challenge, but it's not a deal killer. You pick up that phone, you make a phone call, and you start talking negotiations. A lender does not want to own property. It's a liability.
So not only are realtors negotiating with realtors, but realtors are you have to be a great negotiator. Yeah, I mean, because I know Mary worked at the time where people were losing their homes, and so did I. And I helped a ton of people save their home and not have to move out, because they didn't know that they should call their lender. They thought they had to go put their head in the sand and run from their lender. And if you don't communicate with your lender when you can't make the payments, you're about to lose your house, right?
Or they were calling, and they would call the lender and say, I need help, I can't make my payment, and they would be automatically sent to collection. They didn't understand that they needed to go to loss mitigation, where they would work with them. So there's a lot of things that we are constantly learning in our profession to do that better job for our clients and our clientele. So the consumer is first and foremost in front of mind when we do our jobs. We have a responsibility to take care of them. And a lot of times we're taking care of them, you know, buyers and sellers to make
Well,
it work.
I know that I have to Instacart I have a client that, she can't afford hardly anything and she's selling her home and she wants to move out and, I'm Instacarting them money to go buy cleaning stuff because she's like trying to clean her home. And there was something else I was going to say that was really good and I totally forgot what it was. I hate when that happens. I know, right?
Well, what
There
can
was
you say?
something, what were you talking about just a second ago?
We were talking
A
about
negotiating.
negotiating. We were talking about the issues that you're having with your consumers,
Right.
negotiating with the IRS, the Franchise Tax Board.
So you
Yeah,
never
because-
like we're saying, you never know when something's gonna pop up and you could have spent all that money, but because you're letting the seller represent you or the seller's agent is representing you. And then the other thing that I heard, and I don't know if you heard this because it went by really fast, was when one of the attorneys said, well, I think that in the next year or less or so, somewhere around a year or so, that they're going to want to stop dual agency. So,
Well-
so what happens if a buyer doesn't have an agent and the seller's agent is not allowed to represent
Well,
them?
dual agency has always been a problem and an issue. And for those of us that
Let's
are in
tell
the
them what
business,
dual agency is when you have the same broker for both the buyer and the seller.
well, there was a big lawsuit called Horicki, and I can't
Oh
remember
yes,
the
for
name.
Ricky.
But Horicki was the name of the buyer, and it was against Coldwell Banker. And you had one agent in one Coldwell Banker office, and you had another agent in another Coldwell Banker office, and that was your dual agency right there. And it was huge because it was a multi-million-dollar piece of property, and the lawsuit was huge. I mean, it was big. So dual agency is something that's, you're walking a really fine line. You're representing the buyer and the seller. You have a fiduciary responsibility. There's things that are confidential that you can't disclose, and so
So there's material facts that are about the house that you have to disclose, and then there's confidential information that you can't disclose. And so if you're representing both sides and you know both things, a lot of people say that that's not possible. I'm an advocate for dual agency. I've done dual agency several times, and you just have to disclose what you're supposed to disclose and keep your mouth shut on things you're supposed to keep your mouth shut on.
But you have to be real careful. But DRE's been looking at it, but it's legal here in the state of California. Other states it is not.
I think there's 6 states that do not allow dual agency. So those 6 states that don't allow dual agency, what's going to happen when a buyer can't afford to pay their buyer's agent and yet the seller has an agent? So that's like going to court without an attorney against somebody who has an attorney. Don't you think?
Pretty much.
That's kind of scary,
Yeah.
huh?
It is.
So like I've said a couple of times, you guys, if you have any questions regarding buying, selling, or being a real estate agent, or even being a loan officer, I mean, both of us have done it all since, I don't know how long you've been a loan officer and a real estate agent. I was a loan officer first.
I started in 1982 when interest rates were 19 and 22%.
Right, so that was crazy. So we both have done it. If you have any questions at all, feel free to contact us. We're going to cut it off now because it's going really long, and I'm sure I can steal Mary back for some more information as we learn more stuff, because this week, the final part of the week, we're going to see what CRMLS has to say.
CRMLS is the California
Regional
Multiple Listing Service.
California Regional Multiple Listing Service. It's hard to say really fast.
Yes.
Thank you, Mary, for joining me. I'm sure everybody learned something valuable. As long as, look at their clapping, yay. As long as you learn 1 or 2 things every time you listen to us, it's totally worth listening to us because we're going to help you every step of the way. Thank you, Mary.
You're welcome.
Bye, guys. And then I always have a problem shutting it off.
That was fun.